The smell hit me first, something sharp and metallic, like rusted iron and wet earth. Then came the silence. Not the kind of silence you notice in empty hallways or late at night, but a deeper, suffocating stillness that seemed to crawl beneath your skin. I hadn't seen my brother in almost a decade, but when I opened the front door of his remote woodland cabin and found his journal, pages soaked in something dark and drying, I knew this wasn't a simple reunion. Something had happened here. And whatever it was, hadn't left. 5 creepy stories from 100% true camping nights. Story 1, The Midnight Serenade. The South Carolina night draped itself over the secluded clearing like a velvet shroud, heavy with the scent of pine and the faint musk of damp earth. Beneath a sky pricked with stars, Clara and Ezra pitched their tent in a forgotten pocket of the world, a place where an old bridge sagged over a sluggish creek and rusted railroad tracks snaked into the underbrush, relics of a time long buried. They had chosen this spot on a whim, craving escape from the humdrum pulse of city life, yearning for a weekend where the only sounds were the crackle of a campfire and the whisper of leaves. Clara, with her auburn hair spilling over her shoulders, knelt by the fire pit, coaxing flames from kindling with a patience that belied her restless spirit. She was a woman who thrived on spontaneity, her heart tethered to the thrill of the unknown. Ezra, lean and thoughtful, unfolded their camping chairs, his dark eyes scanning the perimeter of the clearing. He was the anchor to her sail, his pragmatism a quiet counterpoint to her impulsiveness. Yet, as he glanced at the dilapidated white van parked just beyond the tree line, its license plates missing, its windows smeared with grime, a flicker of unease stirred in his chest. "That thing looks like it's been here since the Carter administration," he muttered, half to himself. Clara laughed, brushing a spark from her jeans. "It's probably just some hippie's old ride, abandoned after one too many Grateful Dead shows." Her voice was light, but her gaze lingered on the van, its presence an unwelcome smudge on their idyllic retreat. She shook off the feeling, tossing another log onto the fire. "Come on, let's roast some marshmallows. We didn't drive 3 hours for you to play detective." The evening unfolded with the ease of a well-worn song. They swapped stories over esmores, their laughter mingling with the chirps of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Clara's eyes sparkled as she recounted a childhood misadventure involving a stolen canoe, while Ezra, ever the listener, leaned back, savoring the way her voice danced with mischief. But as the fire dwindled to embers and they crawled into their tent, the weight of the night pressed closer. The air grew thick, the silence no longer comforting but watchful, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. At 3 a.m., the world shifted. Clara stirred first, her dreams pierced by a sound that didn't belong, a voice, low and lilting, weaving through the trees like a thread of smoke. She sat up, heart thudding, her breath catching as the voice grew clearer, its melody haunting and off-kilter. "By the river, by the moon, shadows dance and sing too soon," the words were cryptic, sung in a gravelly tenor that seemed to mock the stillness. Then came laughter, sharp, unhinged, slicing through the night like a blade. "Ezra," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. Her voice trembled, betraying the fear she tried to swallow. "Do you hear that?" Ezra blinked awake, his groggy mind scrambling to parse the sound. He froze as the singing resumed, now joined by the crunch of leaves, the snap of twigs. Footsteps. Not hurried, but deliberate, circling the clearing. His stomach churned, the primal instinct of prey recognizing a predator. "Stay here," he hissed, unzipping the tent with agonizing care. He grabbed the flashlight, its beam a frail defense against the swallowing dark. Clara clutched his arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Don't you dare go out there alone." Her whisper was fierce, her eyes wide with a cocktail of dread and defiance. She wasn't one to cower, but the singing, now closer, now taunting, gnawed at her resolve. By the bridge, where secrets sleep, promises are made to keep, the voice was no longer distant, it was here, just beyond the tent, a presence as tangible as the cold sweat on her brow. Ezra's jaw tightened. He wanted to be the hero, to shield her from whatever lurked in the shadows, but his hands shook as he gripped the flashlight. "We need to pack up." Now. His voice was low, urgent, the words a lifeline to action. They moved in frantic silence, stuffing sleeping bags and gear into their backpacks, every rustle of fabric deafening in the oppressive quiet. The singing stopped, replaced by a new sound, footsteps, heavy and unhurried, closing in. Clara's mind raced, her thoughts a tangle of fear and fury. Who is this? Why us? She pictured the van, its blank windows staring like blind eyes, and a sickening realization hit her: they weren't alone when they arrived. Someone had been watching, waiting. She zipped her backpack, her fingers fumbling, her breath hitching as a shadow loomed against the tense nylon wall, a hulking silhouette, unmistakable and menacing. Ezra, she choked, her voice barely a whisper. He followed her gaze, his face paling as the shadow shifted, accompanied by the soft clink of metal. A bat, maybe, or something worse. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, the world held its breath. Then, a voice, gruff, slurred, dripping with malice, shattered the silence. Y'all shouldn't be here. This is my place. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. She grabbed Ezra's hand, her mind screaming to run, to fight, to survive. Ezra's eyes met hers, a silent vow passing between them: they would make it out. He flicked off the flashlight, plunging them into darkness, hoping to cloak their movements. But the night betrayed them. Headlights flared, harsh and blinding, cutting through the trees from the direction of the van. The silhouette grew sharper, a man, tall, broad, his face obscured by a matted beard and a baseball cap pulled low. He hefted a bat, its wood scarred and splintered, and let out a guttural laugh. Runnin' won't help ya. The clearing became a crucible of terror. Clara stumbled over roots as they fled, her backpack bouncing painfully against her spine. Ezra pulled her along, his breath ragged, his mind a blur of instinct and desperation. The man's shouts followed, each word a lash: I see ya. Ain't nowhere to hide. The headlights bobbed, the van's engine roaring to life, its tires crunching over gravel as it lurched toward them. Clara's thoughts fractured, a kaleidoscope of memories and regrets. She saw her mother's face, heard her father's laughter, felt the ache of dreams unfulfilled. I can't die here. Not like this. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she ran, fueled by a primal will to live. Ezra's grip was her anchor, his presence a reminder that she wasn't alone in this nightmare. The parking lot emerged like a beacon, its lone streetlight a frail halo against the dark. They sprinted toward it, the van's headlights searing their backs. Clara's foot caught on a stone, and she fell, her palms scraping raw against the ground. Ezra hauled her up, his voice breaking. Come on, Clara, we're almost there. The van screeched to a stop, its driver's door swinging open. The man stepped out, bat in hand, his silhouette a grotesque parody of pursuit. But the streetlight's glow seemed to hesitate him, as if its light were a boundary he dared not cross. He stood there, chest heaving, his eyes glinting with a hunger that made Clara's skin crawl. Next time, he snarled, you won't be so lucky. They reached their car, fumbling with keys, slamming doors. Ezra gunned the engine, tires squealing as they tore onto the road. Clara's breath came in sobs, her hands trembling as she clutched the dashboard. The van didn't follow, its headlights fading into the night, but the weight of its presence lingered, a specter they couldn't shake. Miles later, in the sterile glow of a gas station, Clara leaned against Ezra, her tears soaking his shirt. We're okay, he whispered, though his voice wavered. We made it. But Clara's mind was elsewhere, replaying the singing, the footsteps, the man's leering threat. She wondered what secrets that clearing held, what ghosts lingered in its shadows. And as they drove into the dawn, the horizon blushing with promise, she knew one thing with bone-deep certainty: they had escaped, but they would never be the same. Story 2, Shadows at Dawn. The northeast Ohio woodland stretched like an endless tapestry, woven with gnarled oaks and whispering pines, their branches knitting a canopy that filtered the moonlight into silver slivers. Miles had chosen this remote corner of the world for a 3-night communion with nature, a solitary pilgrimage to quiet the clamor of his restless mind. A data analyst by trade, he spent his days tethered to screens, his soul starved for the raw pulse of the wild. Here, in this untamed expanse, he sought solace, stringing his hammock between 2 sturdy maples and draping a tarp to shield him from the autumn chill. Miles was a man of quiet contradictions, introspective yet craving adventure, methodical yet haunted by a gnawing hunger for something undefined. His dark hair fell in unruly waves, and his hazel eyes held a flicker of curiosity that never quite dimmed. As he settled into his first night, the forest embraced him with its symphony, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a whippoorwill, the soft gurgle of a nearby stream. He cooked a simple meal over a compact stove, the flames casting shadows that danced like specters on the forest floor. This is what I needed, he thought, inhaling the crisp air. A reset. A reckoning. The first 2 nights passed in tranquil rhythm. Miles hiked winding trails, sketched the delicate veins of fallen leaves, and journaled by firelight, each word a step toward untangling the knots in his heart. He wrote of his father, whose absence still ached like a bruise, of his fear that life was slipping through his fingers, each day a grain of sand in an hourglass he couldn't flip. The forest listened, its silence a balm, its vastness a mirror to his own uncharted depths. On the final night, the air turned heavy, the forest's lullaby replaced by an oppressive hush. Miles lay in his hammock, cocooned in a sleeping bag, when a faint glow pierced the darkness, a headlamp, bobbing in the distance, far beyond the perimeter of his camp. He sat up, heart stuttering, his breath shallow as he squinted into the void. The light moved erratically, like a firefly caught in a storm, then vanished. A hiker? A ranger? His mind scrambled for logic, but a primal unease coiled in his gut, whispering that this was no innocent wanderer. He clutched the hatchet he kept by his side, its weight a cold comfort. Miles was no stranger to caution, city life had honed his instincts, but this felt different, a violation of the sanctuary he'd carved out. He slipped from the hammock, his boots sinking into the damp earth, and crept toward the edge of his camp, the hatchet's handle slick in his palm. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows, each tree a sentinel, each snap of a twig a warning. Then, closer now, another light flickered, methodical, deliberate, its beam sweeping the underbrush like a predator's gaze. Miles' thoughts churned, a tempest of fear and resolve. I'm alone out here. No one knows where I am. The realization was a blade, sharp and unyielding. He crouched behind a thicket, his breath hitching as the second light grew brighter, its owner moving with a purpose that felt invasive, almost personal. Who are you? What do you want? He tightened his grip on the hatchet, his mind flashing to the stories he'd read, campers stalked, campsites ransacked. He'd always dismissed them as urban legends, but now, with the night pressing against him, they felt like prophecies. The air grew taut, the silence shattered by a new sound, footsteps, heavy and careless, crunching over leaves. Miles' pulse thundered, his body a live wire as he peered through the thicket. The headlamp's beam sliced through the dark, illuminating his campsite, his hammock, his tarp, his backpack propped against a tree. Then, a sound that turned his blood to ice, the slow, deliberate rasp of a zipper along his tent, the one he'd pitched as a decoy beside his hammock. Someone was inside, rummaging, violating the fragile boundary of his world. Miles' mind fractured, torn between flight and fight. Run, and you're prey. Stay, and you're a target. He edged closer, his movements silent, his hatchet raised like a talisman. The intruder was a shadow within the tent, their silhouette hulking and imprecise, their hands tearing through his gear with a recklessness that felt like contempt. Fabric ripped, metal clattered, and Miles' anger surged, a molten counterpoint to his fear. This is mine. You don't get to take it. He was steps from the tent when the intruder froze, as if sensing his presence. The headlamp snapped off, plunging the camp into darkness. Miles held his breath, every nerve screaming, his body poised for a confrontation he wasn't sure he could win. Then, a voice, low, guttural, barely human, muttered something unintelligible, followed by the unmistakable clink of glass. Beer cans, maybe, or something worse. The intruders stumbled out, their shadow lurching toward the trees, leaving the tent's flap gaping like a wound. Miles waited, counting heartbeats, until the footsteps faded. He crept to the tent, his flashlight trembling in his hand, and what he saw stole his breath. His gear was shredded, hammock slashed, tarp torn, clothes strewn like confetti. Empty beer cans littered the ground, their aluminum glinting in the flashlight's beam. Worse, there were traces of something sinister, a plastic baggie with crystalline residue, a needle glinting in the dirt. Meth, he realized, his stomach roiling. This wasn't a prank or a petty theft. This was a predator's mark, a warning that he'd been seen, studied, hunted. Panic clawed at him, but Miles forced himself to move. He gathered what he could, his journal, his stove, a few scraps of clothing, stuffing them into his backpack with shaking hands. His thoughts were a cacophony: get out. Get to the car. Don't look back. The forest, once a refuge, was now a gauntlet, its shadows hiding eyes he couldn't see. He slung the backpack over his shoulder, hatchet still in hand, and began the trek to the trailhead, each step a prayer for survival. The night was merciless, the air thick with the threat of pursuit. Every rustle, every flicker of movement, sent his heart into his throat. He imagined the intruder circling back, their headlamp a beacon of malice, their hands itching for violence. Why me? He wondered, the question a loop in his mind. Was it random, or did I bring this on myself? He thought of his father, whose wanderlust had led him to vanish without a trace, and a bitter irony struck him: maybe this was his inheritance, a legacy of reckless seeking. The trailhead emerged like a lifeline, the gravel lot bathed in the faint glow of a distant streetlight. Miles' car waited, a battered sedan that had carried him through countless escapes. He fumbled with his keys, his breath ragged, and slid inside, locking the doors with a force that echoed his desperation. The engine roared to life, and he peeled out, the forest receding in his rearview mirror, its secret swallowed by the dawn. Hours later, at a diner bathed in fluorescent light, Miles sat hunched over a coffee, his journal open before him. His hand still trembled, but his pen moved with purpose, spilling the night's terror onto the page. He wrote of the headlamps, the zipper's rasp, the residue that spoke of a darkness he'd narrowly escaped. "I'm alive," he scrawled, the words a mantra. "I'm alive, and that's enough." But as he sipped his coffee, the forest lingered in his mind, its shadows etched into his soul. He knew he'd return to the wild someday, his hunger for it was too deep, too intrinsic, but never to that place, never to those woods where dawn had revealed not just danger, but the fragility of his own solitude. And as the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Miles felt a quiet gratitude, a spark of resilience that promised he would keep seeking, keep surviving, no matter what shadows lay in wait. Story 3, The Unwanted Inquiry. The Blue Ridge Mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks cloaked in mist, their slopes a riot of autumnal fire, crimson maples, golden hickories, and evergreens that stood resolute against the relentless winds. Caleb and Darren, bound by a friendship forged in childhood scrapes and late-night confessions, had come to this windswept wilderness during the peak of tourist season, seeking the solace of untamed vistas and the camaraderie of shared adventure. Their campsite, a precarious perch on a rocky outcrop, overlooked a valley where the world seemed to hold its breath, the horizon a canvas of fading light and whispered promises. Caleb, broad-shouldered and quick to laugh, was the dreamer of the pair, his hazel eyes always chasing the next horizon, his heart tethered to the poetry of open skies. Darren, wiry and introspective, was the planner, his dark curls framing a face that wore skepticism like armor. He carried a quiet intensity, his mind a labyrinth of doubts and loyalties, forever weighing the cost of every choice. They had pitched their tents on the mountain's flank, the canvas flapping like sails in the gusts, their lantern casting a warm glow against the encroaching dusk. The day had been a triumph, miles of trails conquered, vistas that stole their breath, and laughter that echoed through the pines. But as night fell, the mountain's charm turned brittle, its beauty laced with an unspoken menace. They sat by a modest fire, the flames sputtering against the wind, swapping stories of past misadventures. Caleb recounted a botched kayaking trip that had left them stranded in a swamp, his voice rich with mock indignation. Darren, nursing a thermos of coffee, smirked. "You're leaving out the part where you thought you saw an alligator and screamed like a kid. It was a log, okay?" Caleb shot back, his grin wide but his eyes flicking to the darkness beyond the firelight. The wind carried a chill that seeped into his bones, and he pulled his jacket tighter, a nagging unease stirring in his chest. Too many people out here today, he thought. Too many eyes. The trails had been crowded with hikers, their chatter a discordant hum, and though he'd brushed it off, the memory of fleeting glances, curious, appraising, lingered like a splinter. Darren, too, felt the shift. His fingers traced the rim of his thermos, his thoughts drifting to the fragility of their solitude. He'd chosen this spot for its remoteness, a calculated retreat from the chaos of their city lives, but the mountain felt crowded, its vastness mocked by the presence of strangers. "We're exposed up here," he realized, his gaze sweeping the slope, where shadows danced in the lantern's glow. The fire popped, and he flinched, a reflex that embarrassed him. "We should turn in soon," he said, his voice clipped. "Wind's picking up." Caleb nodded, though his heart wasn't in it. He wanted to stay by the fire, to cling to the warmth of their banter, but the night pressed closer, its silence no longer a comfort but a threat. They doused the flames, crawled into their tents, and zipped the flaps against the world. Sleep came fitfully, the winds howl a restless lullaby, until, at 1 a.m., a new sound shattered the fragile peace, a crunch of boots on gravel, deliberate and unhurried, just beyond their camp. Caleb's eyes snapped open, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. He lay still, every nerve taut, as the footsteps circled closer. Not an animal, he thought, his mind racing. Too heavy. Too human. He reached for the knife he kept by his sleeping bag, its blade a cold reassurance, and strained to listen. A voice followed, low and gravelly, its tone unnervingly casual. "Nice setup you got here." Darren was awake too, his breath shallow, his hand gripping a flashlight like a lifeline. He unzipped his tent a fraction, peering into the dark, and saw him, a man, disheveled and gaunt, his eyes glinting like polished obsidian in the lantern's faint glow. The stranger's flashlight swept the camp in slow, systematic arcs, lingering on the tents, the lantern, the neatly arranged gear. "He's sizing us up," Darren realized, a chill crawling up his spine. The man's face was weathered, his beard patchy, his movements restless, as if driven by some inner itch he couldn't scratch. Caleb crawled to Darren's tent, his knife clutched tight, his whisper fierce. "Who the hell is that?" His voice trembled, not just with fear but with anger, a primal urge to protect what was theirs. He thought of his younger brother, who looked to him as a shield, and felt a surge of resolve. "I won't let this guy ruin us." Darren's jaw tightened, his mind a storm of calculations. Confront him, and it could escalate. Ignore him, and he might not leave. Stay calm, he hissed, though his own heart was a caged beast. Let's see what he wants. He raised his voice, forcing steadiness. "Hey, man, it's late. We're trying to sleep." The stranger paused, his flashlight beam pinning Darren's tent like a spotlight. "Just admiring your gear," he said, his voice syrupy with false warmth. "That lantern's a beauty. Military grade, yeah. And those tents, bet they cost a pretty penny." He took a step closer, his boots crunching, his eyes darting between the tents with a hunger that made Caleb's skin crawl. "Used to be in law enforcement, you know. Seen a lot of campsites. Yours is, real nice." Caleb's grip on the knife tightened, his thoughts a tangle of dread and defiance. "Law enforcement, my ass." The man's words were a veneer, a predator's charm masking something darker. He pictured the stranger's hands on their gear, their tents, their lives, and a hot spike of rage pierced his fear. "This is our place. Our night. But doubt gnawed at him. Had they been careless, pitching camp so openly? Had they invited this intrusion with their laughter, their fire, their very presence? Darren's mind raced, his instincts screaming to flee, but his body froze, pinned by the stranger's gaze. He's testing us, he thought, the realization a cold weight in his gut. The flashlight's beam felt like a blade, cutting through their defenses, exposing their vulnerability. He thought of his father, a man who'd taught him to trust his gut, and the memory was a spark. We can't stay here. The stranger circled the camp, his footsteps a deliberate rhythm, his silence louder than any threat. He paused by Caleb's tent, his flashlight lingering on the zipper, and Caleb's breath caught, his body coiled like a spring. One move, and I'm on him, he thought, though the idea terrified him. He wasn't a fighter, not really, but the mountain had stripped him to his core, and what remained was raw, unyielding. Darren broke the silence, his voice sharp. Look, we don't want trouble. Just move on, okay? The words were a gamble, a plea wrapped in bravado, and for a moment, the stranger seemed to consider them. Then he chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down Caleb's spine. Trouble, the man said, his tone mocking. I'm just being neighborly. He stepped closer, his shadow looming, and the air grew thick with menace. Caleb's heart pounded, his mind flashing to every horror story he'd ever heard, campers vanished, strangers with knives, nights that ended in blood. Not us. Not tonight. Darren's flashlight flicked on, its beam cutting through the dark, catching the stranger's eyes. They were wild, restless, a mirror to something unhinged. Back off, Darren said, his voice steady now, a command born of desperation. We're leaving. Don't follow. The stranger froze, his smile faltering, and for a heartbeat, the mountain held its breath. Then he raised his hands, the gesture mockingly placating. Your call, boys, he said, stepping back, his flashlight dipping. Safe travels. But his eyes lingered, a promise of unfinished business, and Caleb knew they weren't safe, not yet. They packed in a frenzy, their movements jerky, their breaths ragged. Caleb's hands shook as he stuffed his sleeping bag, his mind a loop of what-ifs. What if he's still out there? What if he follows? He thought of Darren, his anchor through every storm, and felt a surge of gratitude that they were in this together. Darren, meanwhile, worked with grim efficiency, his thoughts a litany of survival. Get to the car. Get to the road. Get out. He glanced at Caleb, saw the fear in his friend's eyes, and felt a pang of guilt. I picked this spot. I should have known better. The stranger's flashlight flickered in the distance, a beacon of threat, but he didn't approach. Caleb and Darren shouldered their packs, abandoning the lantern, the fire pit, the illusion of safety. The trail down the mountain was a gauntlet, the wind howling, the darkness a living thing. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, was the stranger's return, his shadow stretching across their path. They reached the parking lot at dawn, the sky bruising with light, their car a sanctuary of steel and glass. Caleb slid into the passenger seat, his knife still clutched, his breath coming in sobs. We're okay, he whispered, more to himself than to Darren. We're okay. Darren started the engine, his hand steady but his heart racing. Yeah, he said, his voice soft, but we're never coming back here. As they drove away, the mountain loomed in the rearview, its beauty tainted, its secrets buried in the shadows they'd escaped. Caleb leaned against the window, his thoughts drifting to the stranger's eyes, the way they'd stripped him bare. We trusted our instincts, he thought, a fragile victory. And that's enough. But as the road stretched before them, the memory of that unwanted inquiry clung like damp earth, a reminder that safety was a fleeting gift, and the wild, for all its allure, held predators who thrived in its folds. Story 4, The Nocturnal Intruder. Los Padres National Park sprawled beneath a sky heavy with the promise of rain, its rugged hills cloaked in chaparral and oak, its air thick with the scent of sage and impending storm. A group of 4 friends, Lila, Marcus, Tessa, and Javier, had chosen this wild expanse for a weekend escape, undeterred by the forecast, drawn by the park's raw beauty and the pull of their shared history. They pitched their tents in a tight cluster beneath a sturdy blue tarp, the canvas snapping in the gusts, a makeshift fortress against the elements. The evening unfolded with the warmth of old bonds, stories swapped over a crackling fire, laughter that danced with the wind, and pranks that carried the reckless joy of youth. Lila, with her sharp wit and cascade of dark braids, was the group's spark, her laughter a beacon that drew them together. Marcus, broad and steady, was the protector, his deep voice grounding their chaos, though his eyes held a quiet worry he rarely voiced. Tessa, delicate but fierce, sketched the world in her notebook, her artist's soul finding poetry in the mundane. Javier, lean and restless, was the jester, his quick grin masking a heart that bruised easily. They were a tapestry of contrasts, woven by years of shared secrets, and this trip was a pilgrimage to reclaim the ease of their college days. As dusk bled into night, they played a prank call game, Javier's voice morphing into a mock ghostly wail over Marcus's phone, sending Tessa into peals of laughter. "You're terrible," she gasped, swatting Javier's arm, her sketchbook forgotten. Lila leaned against Marcus, her eyes glinting with mischief. "We should haunt the whole park next," she teased, though her gaze flicked to the shadows beyond the tarp, where the forest whispered its own secrets. The rain began, a soft patter that lulled them, but beneath the levity, a thread of unease wove through the group, unspoken but palpable. The mood shifted after midnight, when the prank calls faded and the fire dwindled to embers. Tessa, curled in her tent, stirred at a sound that didn't belong, a rustle, too deliberate to be the wind, too close to be the forest's natural pulse. She sat up, her heart a fluttering bird, her fingers clutching her pencil like a talisman. "It's nothing," she told herself, but her artist's eye, trained to notice the subtle, saw a shadow flicker across the tarp, elongated and wrong. "Someone's out there." Her breath caught, her mind flashing to the RV they'd passed on the way in, a weathered relic parked at the trailhead, its windows dark, its presence an unspoken warning. She unzipped her tent, peering into the drizzle, and saw it again, a figure, indistinct but human, circling the camp with a stealth that felt predatory. Tessa's thoughts spiraled, a kaleidoscope of fear and memory. She remembered her brother, lost to a hiking accident years ago, and the guilt that clung to her like damp earth. "I can't freeze now. Not again." She crawled to Lila's tent, her whisper urgent. "Lila, wake up. There's someone out there." Lila's eyes snapped open, her bravado faltering as she registered Tessa's fear. She was no stranger to danger, city life had taught her to read threats in a glance, but this was different, a violation of the sanctuary they'd built. "Stay here," she hissed, grabbing a flashlight, her mind racing. "Who sneaks around in the rain? What do they want?" She thought of Marcus, their rock, and Javier, whose humor hit a fragile core, and felt a surge of protectiveness. "This is our night. No one gets to ruin it." Marcus stirred, his instincts honed by years of watching over his younger siblings. He joined Lila, his flashlight beam cutting through the mist, and saw the figure again, closer now, slipping into Javier's tent with chilling ease. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice low, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Javier, roused by the commotion, stumbled out of his sleeping bag, his face pale, his usual grin replaced by wide-eyed panic. "Someone's in my tent," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I heard them. They touched my stuff." The rain intensified, a curtain of sound that muffled their voices but amplified their fear. Lila's flashlight caught a glimpse of the intruder's silhouette inside Javier's tent, his movements deliberate, his presence a desecration. Her heart pounded, her thoughts a storm of rage and dread. "He's not just stealing. He's hunting." She pictured the RV, its occupant a ghost in her mind, and a sickening realization hit her. They'd been watched from the moment they arrived, their laughter a beacon, their tarp a target. Marcus took charge, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "We need to scare him off. Together." He grabbed a camp shovel, its edge dull but heavy, and felt a flicker of his old football days, when he'd faced opponents with nothing but grit. "I won't let him hurt them." Tessa, trembling but resolute, clutched her pencil, its point sharp enough to wound in a pinch. Javier, his bravado shattered, stayed close, his mind replaying every horror movie he'd ever mocked. "This isn't a prank. This is real." They approached the tent, their flashlights converging on the flap, and the intruder froze, his silhouette stark against the nylon. The rain drummed, a heartbeat to their standoff, until Lila's voice broke the silence, sharp and fearless. "Get out of our camp. Now." Her words were a blade, honed by years of standing her ground, but inside, she quaked, her thoughts a prayer, "Don't let this end badly." The intruder emerged, his face briefly lit by their beams, a man, weathered and gaunt, his eyes glinting with a mix of defiance and amusement. His clothes were tattered, his smile a jagged slash, and his voice carried the rasp of too many cigarettes. "Just lookin' around," he said, his tone mockingly casual. "Nice place you got." He gestured to the RV in the distance, its bulk a shadow in the rain, and his gaze lingered on Tessa, making her skin crawl. Marcus stepped forward, shovel raised, his voice a growl. "You've got 10 seconds to leave, or we're not asking again." His thoughts were a litany of protection, Lila's fire, Tessa's fragility, Javier's shaken trust. "I can't fail them." The man's smile widened, but he backed away, his hands raised in mock surrender, his eyes promising a return. The confrontation ended as swiftly as it began, the man retreating to his RV, its engine coughing to life before fading into the night. The friends stood frozen, rain soaking their clothes, their breaths ragged. Lila's flashlight trembled, her bravado crumbling as she sank to the ground. "We're okay," she whispered, though her voice wavered. "But we're not." She thought of her mother, who'd taught her to fight, and felt a pang of gratitude for her friends, her chosen family. Tessa's hands shook as she clutched her sketchbook, its pages damp but intact. She saw her brother's face in her mind, his smile a ghost, and vowed to keep creating, to honor him by living fearlessly. Javier, silent, gathered his scattered gear, his thoughts a tangle of shame and relief. "I froze. But I'm still here." Marcus, ever the anchor, checked each tent, his shovel still in hand, his heart heavy with the weight of what might have been. They packed at dawn, the rain a fading memory, the tarps sagging like their spirits. The RV was gone, but its shadow lingered, a reminder of their vulnerability. As they loaded their car, Tessa spoke, her voice soft but firm. "We're stronger than this. We have to be." Her words were a spark, rekindling their bond, and Lila nodded, her grin returning, though tempered by caution. Marcus drove, his eyes on the road, his thoughts on the future. "We'll camp again, but smarter. Safer." Javier, in the back seat, cracked a weak joke, and the laughter that followed was tentative but real, a bridge back to themselves. The park receded, its beauty tainted but not erased, and as the sun broke through the clouds, they carried forward, scarred but unbroken, vowing never to let the night's intruder steal their fire. Story 5, The Stalker in the Quarry. The quarry lay like a secret cradled in the earth, its steep granite walls plunging into waters so deep they seemed to swallow light itself. Under a sky ablaze with stars, Serena and Miles had pitched their tent on a rocky ledge overlooking the mysterious depths, drawn to this secluded haven for a romantic escape. The day had been a tapestry of adventure, snorkeling in the quarry's crystalline embrace, their laughter echoing off the stone, and evenings spent wrapped in blankets, tracing constellations with whispered dreams. Yet, as night draped its velvet shroud, an unease crept in, a subtle discord in the symphony of their bliss. Serena, with her cascade of chestnut curls and eyes that held the warmth of summer, was a woman of quiet strength, her heart a compass for life's wild currents. Miles, lean and contemplative, carried a poet's soul beneath his rugged exterior, his dark gaze always seeking the unseen. They were a study in balance, her fire to his calm, his depth to her radiance, and this trip was a vow to carve out a moment where the world could not intrude. Their tent glowed softly with a lantern's light, a beacon against the quarry's stark beauty, but beyond its warmth, the darkness watched. As they sat by a small fire, the flames casting fleeting shadows on the granite, Serena's fingers traced the edge of a mug, her thoughts drifting to the fragility of their idol. "This place feels eternal," she mused, "but we're just visitors." She glanced at Miles, his profile sharp against the firelight, and felt a swell of love tinged with fear, not of him, but of the world that could steal moments like this. Miles, stirring the coals, sensed her gaze and smiled, though his own mind wandered to darker corners. "We're alone out here," he thought, "but alone doesn't always mean safe." The quarry's isolation, once a gift, now felt like a dare. After midnight, their quiet conversation by the fire was pierced by a flicker of movement, a dark, indistinct figure lurking behind a parked truck at the quarry's edge. Serena's breath caught, her mug slipping from her fingers to clatter on the stone. "Miles," she whispered, her voice a thread of panic, "did you see that?" Her eyes, wide and searching, fixed on the truck, its rusted bulk a silent witness to their growing dread. Miles followed her gaze, his heart a sudden drumbeat. The figure was gone, swallowed by the night, but its presence lingered like a stain. He stood, his hand finding hers, his voice low but steady. "Probably just a shadow. The fire's playing tricks." But his words were a lie he didn't believe, and his thoughts churned with a primal instinct: protect her. Protect us. He scanned the darkness, his poet's imagination conjuring threats, poachers, drifters, ghosts born of the quarry's depths. Serena's grip tightened, her mind racing. "I'm not imagining this." She was no stranger to fear, her childhood had been marked by a father whose temper taught her to read danger in silence, but this was different, a violation of the sanctuary they'd built. "Let's check the tent," she said, her voice firmer now, a shield against the unknown. They moved together, their steps cautious, the lantern's glow a frail defense against the night's weight. As they secured the tent, the unease deepened. Serena's fingers trembled as she zipped the flap, her thoughts a tangle of defiance and doubt. "We chose this place for peace. Why does it feel like a trap?" Miles, standing guard, felt the quarry's walls closing in, their grandeur now a cage. He thought of his mother, who'd vanished on a solo hike when he was a boy, and a cold resolve settled in his bones. "I won't lose her. Not tonight." They ventured out for a midnight stroll along the quarry's edge, hoping to reclaim the night's magic, but the air had turned thick, the stars dimmed by a creeping dread. Serena's hand stayed in Miles, her pulse a quiet thunder, her eyes darting to the shadows. Then she saw it again, the figure, now closer, matching their steps with a deliberate grace that sent ice through her veins. "He's following us," she realized, her heart lurching. The stalker's movements were a mirror, slow and relentless, each shift in their path echoed by his own. Miles felt it too, his body tensing, his thoughts a storm of rage and fear. "Who are you? What do you want?" He pulled Serena closer, his voice a hushed command. "Don't look back. Keep walking." But his mind screamed to confront the shadow, to demand answers, to end this silent pursuit. He pictured the figure's face, gaunt, hollow-eyed, a specter born of his worst nightmares, and felt a surge of protectiveness that bordered on recklessness. Serena's steps quickened, her breath shallow, her thoughts fracturing. "We're prey." The word was a blade, cutting through her courage. She remembered a night years ago, walking home alone, the footsteps behind her a ghost she'd outrun. Not this time. She glanced at Miles, saw the strain in his jaw, and felt a flicker of gratitude that they faced this together. "Miles," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute, "we need to get to the car." He nodded, his eyes scanning the path ahead, the quarry's edge a perilous drop to their left. The stalker's presence was a weight, oppressive and unyielding, his silhouette a constant in their periphery. Every rustle of gravel, every shift in the wind, was his approach, his intent a mystery that gnawed at their sanity. Miles' hand tightened on Serena's, his thoughts a vow: "I'll get us out. I have to." The tension snapped like a taut wire. Serena stumbled, her foot catching on a loose stone, and the stalker's shadow loomed closer, his movements no longer cautious but bold. Miles' heart roared, his poet's soul giving way to a warrior's instinct. "Run," he hissed, pulling Serena toward the parking lot, their tent and gear abandoned in a heartbeat. The quarry became a gauntlet, its beauty twisted into menace, its silence a scream. Serena's legs burned, her lungs aching as she ran, her thoughts a desperate litany, "Don't look back. Don't stop." She pictured her sister, her laughter a lifeline, and clung to the image as they sprinted, the stalker's footsteps a relentless echo. Miles led the way, his body a shield, his mind flashing to his mother's fate. "Not us. Not now." The parking lot emerged, a gravel oasis under a lone streetlight, their car a beacon of salvation. They reached it, fumbling with keys, their breaths ragged sobs. Serena dove into the passenger seat, her hands shaking as she locked the door, her eyes fixed on the darkness. The stalker lingered at the quarry's edge, his figure a silhouette against the starless sky, his presence a promise of unfinished pursuit. Miles gunned the engine, tires screeching as they tore onto the road, the quarry receding like a bad dream. Serena's voice broke the silence, a whisper thick with tears. "He was watching us the whole time." Her words were a wound, raw and bleeding, and she leaned against Miles, her body trembling. "We trusted this place," she thought, "and it betrayed us." Miles' hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, his thoughts a storm of relief and rage. "We're safe now," he said, though his voice wavered. "He can't follow us." But the stalker's shadow clung to them, a specter in their minds. Serena's fingers traced the window, her thoughts drifting to the quarry's depths, its beauty now a mask for danger. "We escaped," she realized, but at what cost? Miles, driving into the dawn, felt the weight of their survival, a fragile victory tempered by loss. "We'll heal," he vowed, "but we'll never forget." Hours later, in a roadside diner bathed in morning light, Serena and Miles sat across from each other, coffee cups untouched, their hands entwined. The quarry was miles behind, but its shadow lingered, a reminder of the line between nature's embrace and its hidden teeth. Serena's eyes met Miles', a silent pact passing between them, they would carry this night, but they would not let it define them. As the sun climbed, painting the sky in hues of hope, they drove on, the road a ribbon of possibility. The stalker's face remained a ghost, his motives a mystery, but Serena and Miles held fast to their bond, a light no darkness could extinguish. And though the quarry's waters still whispered in their dreams, they knew one truth above all, they had faced the shadow and emerged, scarred but whole, into the dawn.